Okay, walk with me on this journey. It's not going to be a very long journey, but I'm going to explain it to you. There is something called the Griffin Poetry Prize. This prize is a Canadian prize. It's founded by Scott Griffin. However, for a really long time, there was a Canadian component to this prize, an international component to this prize. That means one Canadian poet would win the Griffin Poetry Prize every year, and an international poet would also win it. Two distinct categories. 4 years ago, that Canadian category was eliminated. Suddenly there was just one big prize. And Canadian poets, they had some thoughts about that. Well, 4 years later, Scott Griffin, who is the founder and funder of this prize, opened his doors and he held a town hall this week because he wanted to hear some feedback on how that change was going. Paul Vermeersch was there at that town hall, and now he's here on this show to explain all the things that the Canadian component of the prize did for Canadian poetry and how much it hurts to have actually lost it, and also just exactly how that town hall went. I got a lot out of this conversation. I think you will too. Let's go. Paul, it's good to see you, pal. How you doing?
Thanks, Elamin. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me back.
Yes, of course. Listen, first, when I first heard about this town hall, the first thought that occurred to me is actually like, that's pretty courageous. It's a courageous thing of Scott Griffin to do, to say, I'm going to open the door. I'm going to have people come in and say, all right, Scott Griffin, I should say, founded the prize, funds it. I'm going to hear the criticism that people have firsthand and in person. The first question he answered was, what was the point of making these changes in the first place? Briefly, can you explain what was the reason?
The reason that Scott Griffin gave when that question was asked in the town hall was to say, let's go back 26 years. And he painted a picture of the initial inception, the initial impetus for creating the Griffin Poetry Prize in the first place, which in his words was to raise the profile of poetry around the world.
Hmm.
Which is a laudable goal, and he made the point of saying not specifically Canadian poetry, but to raise the profile of poetry around the world.
Yeah.
Now, the Griffin Prize is specifically an English language prize, which it always has been, which includes translations, but translations into English. And Ian Williams, who is a poet and a former nominee for the Griffin Prize and currently a trustee for the Griffin Trust,
Yeah.
added
He was also there at the
some
town hall. Yeah.
he was it was Scott Griffin and Ian Williams were sort of representing the prize
Yeah.
at the town hall, and Ian Williams added a comment to the effect that some of the thinking about making the changes to the Griffin Prize was to make it a more international prize in the vein of like the Booker or something like that.
Right.
Um,
So
that might elevate its prestige.
So you hear from Scott Griffin, he says, well, the point of the Griffin Prize in the first place was to raise a profile of poetry internationally. That's the reason why I wanted to do this. That's the reason for some of these changes. Why do you think this change has been so hard on Canadian poets specifically?
The first thing I'll say is for anyone listening to the program right now, the CBC website published an article in 2022 by Alicia Elliott called something to the effect of why the Griffin Prize combining its prizes is bad news for Canadian poets. The title was something like that.
Yeah.
And Alicia Elliott made a lot of great points 4 years ago and maybe I'll just summarize some of the things that are covered in that article because I agree with them completely. So even though even though the Griffin Prize was maybe conceived to elevate the profile of poetry and maybe not specifically Canadian poetry, what it was in fact was a pair of prizes, two prizes, one specifically for a Canadian book and one specifically for an international book.
Yeah.
And what this prize structure did for 21 years was present Canadian poetry as equal to poetry from anywhere in the world. It made it more discoverable. It made Canadian poetry more prestigious. It provided Canadian poets with a greater, more concentrated avenue towards financial stability, discoverability, a broader readership, perhaps an opportunity for a more lucrative book deal down the road, perhaps an opportunity for career advancement, teaching opportunities,
Yeah.
all kinds of real world benefits, great higher book sales, all kinds of real world benefits that could be felt and were felt immediately. Um, higher profile, discoverability,
Yeah.
career advancement, all these things. And during that 21-year period, um, most other attention given to books of poetry in Canada uh, kind of withered away and died. Um, Book review sections in newspapers are all but extinct.
Yeah.
The trade magazines that used to review 3 or 4 books of poetry every issue now review 3 or 4 books of poetry a year. Um, and probably unintentionally, the Griffin Prize became sort of has a de facto monopoly on the attention that poetry receives in this country.
Hmm.
And so when the Canadian specific prize was removed from the equation, uh, there was nothing left, just a desert of sort of opportunities for poetry books to find a wider audience.
Right.
And that's been detrimental to people's financial stability, to the publishing industry in Canada that isn't multinational, and to the potential for career advancement and all kinds of things.
I want
So,
to hold on that for just a moment because I think the stuff that you just highlighted there is actually really important to do. I think like there is you're trying to say that even though Scott Griffin may say right like that like, the point of the prize was to raise the profile of poetry internationally, and that's fair, but in effect, what having the prize structure be as like here's one for Canadian poets and then here's one for international poets, what that does is actually foster a larger ecosystem. It sort of ends up growing an ecosystem in a way that was really healthy for a lot of Canadian poets. It raises the profile, raises, as you mentioned, the discoverability. It boosts their book sales, while at the same time, the ecosystem that supports sort of getting the word out about books and about poets and poetry specifically has kind of shrinked, shrunk in a sort of really meaningful way. And so the Griffin Prize ends up playing a bigger and bigger role, right? So sort of cut to now, right? Cut to this town hall yesterday. Ian Williams, who's one of the trustees, he said it was a mistake not to have public consultations before these changes were made, and before they merged the two categories. He said that this process is an effort to remedy that. How optimistic are you about the outcome of all of this? Because you kind of highlighted all the need for the poetry prize there. When you sort of look at this
mhm.
process, when you look at this process, you go, "Oh, this feels like it's a way to remedy this."
Uh, there's a lot in that question.
Hmm.
How optimistic am I? I don't know how optimistic to be.
Okay.
What we were told was that the trustees would be given all the information collected, and that the town hall was in effect a three-pronged sort of information gathering process. First was emails that went out, and people in the community were invited to submit by email their thoughts about the changes to the prize structure.
Yeah.
So, in writing first, in person, which was the first half of yesterday's town hall. So people who were actually
Yeah.
in the room where it happened, and then the second half of the town hall was on Zoom, so that members of the community and the publishing industry from across the country could participate as well.
Right.
So there's this three-pronged effort to gather intelligence. That information is going to be given to the trustees following the Griffin Prize event on June 3rd. And we were told that the
Right.
trustees would be meeting June 3rd, June 4th, and June 5th, and considering the information that was gathered
Yeah.
in this sort of
Which
three
sounds like the
three pronged
feedback
effort.
universally was saying, "Hey, bring back the Canadian prize, Canadian only prize."
And almost unanimous uh,
Yes.
from the community was, we would like to see a Canadian prize again.
Yeah.
And the answer to that, uh, Ian Williams and Scott Griffin sort of kept trying to position this option as a silo, as something that belittled or diminished Canadian poetry, or suggested that it wasn't up to the task of competing
Hmm.
with international poetry, that it was maybe like I think that silo was the word that kept coming up, and the implication that I kept understanding was that it was some kind of tokenizing or ghettoizing of Canadian poetry.
Hmm.
But nobody in Canada ever saw the Canadian Poetry Prize that way. It
Yeah.
was a showcase. It was Canadian poets and international poets were standing shoulder to shoulder on the same stage. It was an equalizing opportunity, not a tokenizing
Yeah.
opportunity. And so almost unanimously, the feedback from the community has been, we would like the Canadian Prize brought back, and if not in its original form, in some other form.
I'm consistently sort of fascinated by how this process unfolds, because it does not only apply to poetry. I think we had the same conversation, for example, about TIFF, and like the idea of like TIFF having a separate program for Canadian films. Does that sort of silo Canadian films into a different category, or does it actually draw a string of lights to say, like, among all these international films that are coming to this festival, also look at all this, all this programming that caters to specifically Canadian films? And so I'm interested in this conversation. Obviously, this conversation is not over. But Paul, I got to say thank you for being here. I really appreciate your time. We're going to have you back as this whole process continues to unfold, but I really appreciate your time. Thanks for being here, friend.
Thanks a lot for having me. I'd be happy to come back anytime.
Yes, of course. Paul Vermeersch is a poet and professor of creative writing and publishing at Sheridan College. He was right here in Toronto. Look, my name is Elamin Abdelmahmoud. This show is called Commotion. We'll be back tomorrow. We'd love to see you then. In the meantime, have a great day.